So for the next panel, we're going to continue with the theme of beyond use cases and try to share some stories on the ground and the journeys that organizations are going through as they've gone from experimenting around use cases and what are some of the things that they're doing on the ground to really start scaling capabilities and rethinking their organizations. So I'll ask the two gentlemen to introduce themselves. We have Chida from our AI and data practice. We have Maciek joining us from PNC, who leads decisioning infrastructure and does a lot of work in the credit decisioning space. So AI and machine learning is a core part of what he does.
So introduction, Maciek Dlugosz at PNC, head of decisioning infrastructure. What that essentially means is that my group is accountable for implementing the bank's strategies, models, policies into how we decision our customers across the entire life cycle. So, whether it's from marketing all the way through to collections, across all of the retail products of the bank, we deal with fraud, pricing. So the topic of how to leverage AI becomes very relevant to us.
Okay, I'm Chida, part of Deloitte AI and Data, also as part of the AI and engineering team. I'm working with Deloitte for the past 7 years. I used to be an entrepreneur. Then eventually I built a bunch of data companies, and one of the companies which I sold was bought by Deloitte. So I have a little perspective of how the rest of the world works and how Deloitte works. I'm here to answer any questions.
So, Chida, I'll start with you. So we have a good mix of startups and big companies in the room. I'd love to hear, how you've observed the differences between these two, particularly as it relates to AI, right? Your role in the startup world, but now your role today, working with clients as well as working in a 400,000 person plus company at Deloitte.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Also, very appropriate for the audience here. So the startups actually. If the startups start building ideas matching to the enterprise, that's the a little bit golden way of doing it, right? Because going to consumer is one thing, but building products or building ideas for any enterprises is the next thing. That's what I did. So I always had the connection with the enterprises and build ideas what they would buy. And then made my life a little easier, right? That's why the exit eventually went to Deloitte, because Deloitte was serving bigger customers, almost having the similar problem. But even though the Deloitte is big, they can take ideas, very small ideas like how I brought to them, is they embrace that and then they feel the value of how it can be applicable to the customer, end customer, say example PNC, right? So the big consulting is good, global. So suddenly I was to get into, for example, to see Maciek in my life as a startup owner, it took 7 years, right? Now to see Maciek here and from PNC, it took just 1 day, right? Because Deloitte has the relationship and the way to do it. So it's easier to get your ideas in front of the customer because they are already struggling to solve the problem. And then as long as they're open to it, they will adopt it. And Deloitte is just the conduit in between. That's how I feel. So 7 years, I've been still treated like a startup guy within Deloitte. That's why, I'm here.
And how is that translated into solving problems for clients nowadays? And what do you see your clients, facing in terms of like the big challenges? We've talked a lot about data and governance and ROI. We'd love to hear a little bit about how that experience is applying to those issues.
Got it. So now, I think the initial keynote you heard about, the technology is changing very fast, right? The cycle is faster. The big data took 10 years. The cloud took another 10 years, but machine learning took 3 years. Now, Gen AI took 18 months. Now, Agentic AI is taking in 6 months, right? So what translates that is the customers are ready to adopt the new technologies, but the competition is stiff, and also the amount of energy they need to compete and also learn is very difficult, right? So that's what you are seeing. You are hearing one way of a lot of AI happening, but how the enterprises are adopting. So the way what we are starting that is, it is people, process, technology, right? How people have to be aligned in your organization to get the technology onboarded. Maybe this is a time for process reimagination, and then that's where we start, because there is so many technologies are going to be available, but how it fits into any enterprises. So people process technology, it can easily applicable. But in this scenario, in this cycle, this has to be fast, because next one is going to come, right, before you know about it. That's how I feel.
So speaking of fast, I think about the credit decisioning process and world at a PNC. Love to hear about your perspective and the evolution of machine learning and AI in the credit decisioning space.
Yeah. So, I mean, unlike working for startups, my history has probably been through more coming at this from a model risk perspective, from essentially growing up by watching modeling technologies evolve, as opposed to say software development, so on and so on. So. We've been using machine learning for some time. Now we're starting to use more and more sophisticated models. And the way I think about it is, you get more and more data, your models get more and more complicated, right? The data moves faster and faster. You need faster and faster way of calculating the outcome of the model and then taking it out to the customers, if you will. So, the way I think about it is that there has been a lot of technology changing around us very fast. As a big bank, we had to learn how to adopt it. So, whether it's all kinds of digitalization technologies, whether it's just an advent of microservices-based infrastructures, whether it's a profusion of the use of internal, external APIs, and frankly, centralization of the data. All of that, from my perspective, meant that all these technologies now allow me to interact with the customers faster and faster and in a more and more personalized fashion, right? So from my perspective, the filter is always, what is the best thing that I can do for the customer, right? Altruistically speaking, not so much, but in terms, well, of course, but, how do I get value for the bank? How do I get value for the customer? And how does all of this come together? And what is the best thing out there that I can apply to fit into the overall technologies to essentially get that customer to in our case, become a PNC client, or take value out of PNC or stay with us and so on.
How have the risk processes and controls evolved with that, right? So, one of the things we've seen from a use case prioritization world, and now we're getting to more transformative efforts right now, is it started largely with the back office and middle office and those use cases that don't necessarily touch the customer. But now, because there's a tremendous amount of value in the servicing side and front office, where there's an ability to augment that service and sales staff, or really change and impact the customer experience. I'm curious, like, from a credit decisioning standpoint, and Chida, from your experience, like, how is governance and the dialogue internally going toward, and the risk appetite going towards exposing some of these capabilities to customers?
Yeah. So first and foremost, we're a bank, which means we're incredibly regulated. Tolerance for error is zero, and I pretty much mean that even a single decision that goes wrong and somehow disadvantages the customer is open to scrutiny. And so everything we do lives and dies by governance. Everything we do lives and dies by very strong compliance oversight and so on. So in the case of, if I think of AI specifically, right, of what we're applying as we're accelerating the decisioning, as we're doing faster and faster, more and hyper-personalized interaction with the customers, the governance gets frankly more and more complicated, to be honest. Essentially, it has to speed up. So model risk governance, for example, is starting to evolve very rapidly. And yet the principles remain. Everything we do has to be explainable. Everything we do has to have a very clear view of how you're going to deploy it and how it touches the customer, which, by the way, is a little bit of a tricky thing when you're deploying AI models, because it's not that easy to point to a specific data attribute and how that data attribute is going to advantage or disadvantage a particular customer in a particular space, and in particular convince somebody that's going to happen in real time today as opposed to a month later or something like that. So the speed of governance is increasing. The scrutiny is absolutely increasing. So strangely enough, one of the things that's happening is that we're now actually starting to deploy AI to build controls that can keep up with the pace of change of AI application in modeling, in deploying agents and so on. So AI starts controlling itself in a way.
Who's involved in that decisioning right now, or in that governance? I mean, is it primarily IT led right now, or how involved is the business?
No. So in order for this to succeed, again, I've outlined a very sort of comprehensive interaction between all kinds of evolving technologies, right? So, we talked about APIs, et cetera. So that's very technology centric. But in order for this to succeed, you need your data scientists, you need your modelers, you need your compliance people, you need your risk people. And in many ways, the trick is that we all have to be ready to adopt AI at the same time. So, it's interesting when you're at a forum like this and we're talking about AI agents, and, from a developer's perspective or from a technology perspective, the thinking may be here, right? But then from a perspective of bring all the different parts of the company together to adopt that, implement it, figure out how it's going to work, how it's going to the customer, everybody has to be ready, for that to actually work and make it into the actual production systems.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing on the governance, right? The companies which we are seeing now, there are chief AI officers are showing up, right? The chief AI officers, some of them are directly reporting to the CEO. If you remember, the chief data officers were there 10 years back when the big data came. Then when the cloud came, I think the data officers were not there, right? Now the chief data officers are coming back, right? All this agentic AI, all this AI needed is the enterprises needed to bring the data together first, right? So they are making organizational change. So the chief AI officer can talk about the explainability, talks about the ethics, what the AI is going to bring. So they need more than the technology people and data people, somebody to really, advocate for each other and also put a governance for each other, right? I think that's happening in the industry, which we are seeing.
And I want to push on that. Great call out. Like, what's the reporting structure of the chief AI officer that you're seeing? Is it like direct report to the CEO? Is it on the chief data officer team? Is it an evolution of the chief data officer? Like, where do you see the head of AI fitting?
I see we see several patterns, but the successful pattern is, I would say, chief AI officer, but also chief AI officer is attached to a center of excellence. Right? Because going back to the technology is evolving fast. So they wanted to do a center of excellence, making sure they're bringing the right technologies. And then they're talking to the CEOs. But there is also chief data officers also getting kind of chief AI officer title as well. They normally report to the CIO. So we see like two paths into it. So it is evolving. Like you said, it is coming very fast, but I think that org structure, people are thinking through that, which is a good thing.
I mean, if I can just sort of add to that, and again, I'm not going to comment for PNC overall, but I can comment for sort of my area, if you will. If you think of it from the perspective of AI as a technology, right? That's one thing. If you think of it from the perspective of like deploying agents or restructuring the operations and thinking of it from the infrastructure efficiency. That's one perspective. If you think of AI as enabling specific use cases, right? A very, very specific actions and use cases, then it's a different animal. Then it's a composition. That's where I guess the agents fit into that, right? It's a composition of a number of things interplaying together. In that, let's give you an example. If I'm moving now to a situation where I would like to react to a particular event. I don't know, somebody off ask has started to use a line of credit a little bit more aggressively, and we would like them to use our card as a line of credit. And I literally just noticed that yesterday or today, this morning, because the bureau sent me the data feed, which I now can consume in real time, which I never could do before. So now I have to translate that into a very specific event, very specific action, et cetera, right? So now an entire chain of events has to happen. That chain of events starts out by me reading a signal, right? Then analyzing that signal as part of a model, because now I have to get that information as part of all the different models that we run, et cetera, et cetera. Now I translate that into some sort of an action that has to meet all kinds of compliance rules, right? At that point, I then reach out to the customer and potentially interact and give that customer some sort of a decision, right? That decision is absolutely subject to any kind of scrutiny by regulator and so on. The customer may like the decision or may not like the decision. So in real time, the customer may say to me, so sorry, I want something else. And now I have to play a game of optionality. So why am I saying this? If you think of AI from the perspective of software development or model development, that's one thing. If you think of AI as just a whole bunch of use cases for how you interact with your customers and how that's going to help specific decisions that you're going to make for that customer, then you can't think of it as one role is going to solve that problem. What you have to think of it is, I now have to have a whole bunch of people that have to be aligned on their thinking, working together to make that black box-based decision thing succeed and not harm the customer, on the contrary, bring value, and so on. So I think the struggle from my perspective is less about having a person appointed, but rather having a governance that can comprehensively deal with all of these problems at the speed that is essentially milliseconds, if you will.
And it's a good tee up for the question around the workforce, right? So in the language of agentic, we're seeing companies really start to think, okay, it's one thing to be delivering use cases and automating processes that exist today. What does that future model look like right now? And how am I deploying a agent plus human workforce in certain functions and areas? Chida, talk a little bit about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, we are definitely seeing the work. Imagine we are talking about 100 agents, like your help desk person could be an agent. Instead of instead of 100 help desk people, you have now one manager, but there's 100 agents are running, right? So the human in the loop always, but the human is kind of little bit validating what the agents are doing. Now think about that agents also now part of your org structure, because they are also not going to behave well, or they might behave well, you might have to reward them, right? And then as you know, the rewarding is how the agent or the LLM and the agents behave, right? So the way the organization, I think we have, maybe can I quote an example for that?
Can we quote? Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So meaning without she's right here. Okay. One of the banking customers which we have enabled the agents to process the credit applications, and then we have not replaced any humans yet, but we have accelerated the agents to do data engineering work, right? So the way the data has been collected and consolidated in a common data warehouse, or you want to call it data mart or data lake, agents are doing it now at very fast pace. They also validate, and then when the alert comes, the alert also takes action on it, right? So now that whole set of those agents, around 500 of them are running every day, 7/24. And then now the org is looking at who is managing those agents, making sure that the person or the persons who are overseeing that agent, are they delivering the right data? It is coming all the way to the model output. It is all the way going to the emails, the right context and the right text. Everything has been validated, right? So the companies are feeling a little bit more stressed about it's just validating the outcome, but here is validating the business outcome the agents are coming out with, right? I think within the next 2 years, I think the enterprises will learn that much better. And then it is a little bit more of refining that. I think the whatever they call it in the wordings, hallucination, all that stuff. I think they get better and better because the industry is also changing the way it does it, right? So the agents will become part of the org, but it'll be owned by maybe an agent director or agent VP who would make sure that which agent. Now, we are talking about only one because this is still an infrastructure, I would say data consolidation thing. But there will be verticals, like people from customer relations, people from business development, people from procurement. Everyone would start consuming this data, and then they would become the agent's director or agent VP. That's what we are seeing.
Maciek, you look skeptical. Is it? What do you think about the credit decisioning area and like rethinking the workforce?
Well, so again, the theme from, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a whole bunch of people that have to be ready at the same time in order to deliver the use cases that rely on the agents and AI thinking and so on. The reason why I'm skeptical is because it's like this. Ultimately, what do all the agents deliver? They deliver some sort of a use case, right? And there's hundreds of use cases. And once you start understanding the speed and the breadth of the technologies that we have available to us and the hyper-personalization needs, the use cases just keep growing. Like, it's funny, there was a conference here last year. Folks were talking, there was like the beginning of thinking about agents, right? And it was almost like we were searching for use cases. It was okay. There was like, you can do this with AI, you can create agents, but what the heck are you going to use them for? And of course, there are brilliant thoughts that come out, but now I think a year later, what has changed is that I can think of 100 use cases on an ongoing basis because of the fact that I now have the technology, we have as I said, the speed, the data, et cetera, to deliver all these use cases to the customer. And almost every use case says to me, oh, I could turn that into an agent, right? So, but at the same time, a little bit of skepticism. So as I'm trying to think, right? One of the primary use cases would be in a care center, right? You're interacting with a customer, the customer does something, right? So let's pick an example. Let's imagine that you suspect that there was a fraudulent transaction, right? Otherwise known as there's potentially a fraudster at the back end. Probably one of the biggest uses of AI modeling will be in identity verification and fraud detection, broadly speaking, because super complex models, lots of things happening. You end up with that little thing where it says that person may be a fraudster, right? So now somebody's got to call that person. Well, the human, I love the word agent, an actual agent calls the person, right, and either gets them or doesn't get them, but the person follows a script. So an obvious thing to do would be to replace that script with, very nicely scripted, large language model based kind of interactions that is going to change depending on the hour of the day and what the person did and so on and so on. Perfect use case, right? Except that, well, every interaction like that is regulated, right? There's certain things you're supposed to do. There's certain things you can't. So in every one of those interactions, historically, we have templates that are standardized, that are pre-approved, that are vetted, right? But now you're saying I'm going to replace a template with essentially a dynamic conversation with a potential fraudster. I don't know how that works, to be honest with you. A dynamic conversation with a fraudster. How do I demonstrate to the regulator that the dynamic conversation with a fraudster yielded the right decision where essentially that we're not going to grant a decision to that fraudster? So I'm not saying it's not doable. What I'm saying is that we're now entering with the agents into a world that is very, very, very heavily dependent on certain patterns, pre-approvals, templates, standards, right? Regulated, reviewed, transparent. And now you have to kind of ask the question, how do you adapt those so that the agent can do its work? Do you know what I mean? And by the way, I don't have necessarily an answer. We're sort of inching into that ever so gently, gingerly.
Well, it's another good point in terms of, some of this is around the language around agentic and even Gen AI and the fact that that's only, as we've talked about in past sessions, a portion of the types of AI that's out there. And, we talked a little bit about the foundational machine learning you use today. How much of this too is just like, there's the hype and belief that now, top-down demands and expectations are coming in terms of you need to use agentic, right? You need to be building agents for this and rethinking your workforce versus taking a more portfolio-based approach where some things are a good fit for agents, some things might be better for more conversational or, other types of AI. So
yeah, I think definitely there is a use case definition or use case validation is happening, right? That's one of the things. What currently we are seeing is, or we are recommending is, it's just if you remember 5-6 years back, something called RPA, robotic process automation. Everybody thought robotic is actually it was AI, right? But it was not. You all know it's like a robot. It just does it. It does the same job faster, right? Now, one of the use case, we call it entry point or validation of the use cases the industry is looking at is, can we convert those RPAs into agents, right? So if we do that, for example, yes, that's a good use case, but then it's almost become a lift and shift, right? You are lifting this without having a context knowledge given to that robo. Can we introduce that, right? So the way even the Deloitte recommends is, we are saying, this is a good time to do the process reimagination. Think about 30 years of ERP. You are having it. And then now the agent is actually a catalyst to think about the process. Because what happened was the industry, maybe the big automotive company or a big manufacturing company, 20 years back, 80% of their technology is ERP. But today, 40% of the technology is ERP. They bought SaaS products, they built custom bolts around it, and then the ERPs are expensive. They did not modernize it. They're still doing the same thing. Here comes the agent, right? So the ERP can just collect the OLTP, correct the transactions, and then let the agents think about the process with some brain in it, right? So going back to what we talked about, that's where the data consolidation need to happen. And then the world is also a little bit last 10 years, double down on cloud, right? Everything has to be cloud. Go to cloud, go to cloud. If you don't go to cloud, you will be in cloud, right? So what happened, people did not spend a lot of time and attention to their data problems. And now they are slow to react to the AI solutions, right? Because now this is a time to assemble their data in the right way and then use the mundane process to rethink about it, and then just don't take the agent because agent is cool. Definitely it is cool, but think about how we can reimagine your own business process. I mean, that's the validation of the agentic use cases are happening, right? It's happening on the back end, like especially on the infrastructure, programming, and then validation. And then the one example I can quote is, I was about to hold it for you. With the marketing, I think there's a big company to prepare their go-to-market material for a conference. It takes 6 months because it needs so many graphics, assemble, get it approval. But using agents, they're doing it in 6 weeks, right? Which is a very good use case because they do global conferencing, right? The same conference happening in Las Vegas versus Paris. The content has to be different, audience is different, and the agents can build it for you because they have already done conferences for about 30 years, right? So those are all the examples, which is a little bit not customer affecting yet, but internally the company can feel the realization of the value. Make sense?
Yeah. I want to open it up to questions in the last several minutes from the group. Would love to hear what's top of mind for all of you.
Not to scream it. Throughout history, when new technologies come, there's always been like over automation, or do you see over AI? You had mentioned I have an RPA system that works. it's usually just an algorithm. It's going to be 1, 2, or 3. Why would I need an AI engine to make that determination when it's either going to be 1, 2, or 3? So I guess bottom line, do you see over AI?
Agree with you. I think if it is already doing what you're looking to do, you don't. If you have 10 RPA actions happening, you don't have to change it at all, right? Just leave it as it is, because it doesn't need more intelligence than that, right? But some of the RPAs they wanted to have intelligence, but unfortunately just doing repeatable tasks. So they would be evaluated, right? And then obviously the technology refresh is also happening, right? And then you also know that. I don't have to tell you that. The RPA companies are telling you, you better upgrade to version 23.x, otherwise you won't get the agents, right? So you are sucked into it, right? It's just the mainframe still there working. Some people are definitely not excited about the technology. It's working, and then very similar. If that RPA is working, those 10 definitely not over AI. That, right? I think the industry learned that, but we also don't learn that. You know that, right? New VP comes, make a new decision. You bought a new product, get it done tomorrow. Yeah. Yes, make it work.
Hi. So we talked a lot about different use cases, but I'm curious, I think with a lot of technology advancements, I think it's similar to the last question. In larger corporations, there's an adoption time after it's adopted. When you think of all these use cases, and I know you mentioned it, a whole team needs to be on the same page for it to go at once and to be successful. But if it's a task-oriented one, to get the adoption and the true users in it takes massive training and beyond. So how do you see in companies both manage what do we do from an AI use case and how do we get others to adopt, or how do we have one process ongoing while we're getting others to adopt this new process?
Go.
Yeah, I can maybe try to attempt it at first, right? So again, sort of the theme of what I was trying to say is that many ways the use cases start developing naturally so that the demand arises, and kind of to your point, rather than saying, oh, I can develop a particular agentic use case or deploy a particular LLM to do something and let's see who adopts it. At least where we're right now in my space, the thinking is flipping. I have to adopt agents, or I have to adopt AI because of the scale and the speed of the problem resolution is such that I just can't handle it otherwise, right? So I think that's one of the key things is essentially that is you start going from, now that you understand the technology, now that one understands the technology, now that one has all these tools deployed, the use cases start kind of coming up as to where the technology itself dictates that AI should fit in and support the execution of that particular use case. And that's what I'm saying, right? We went from trying to figure out, hey, we could do something really cool, to, oh my goodness, I could deploy this here and here and here, use it in marketing and so on. I think one of the key things, another key thing with adoptions is the sheer fact that just the life cycle of large projects, right? The AI use case comes at the back end usually of a large technology transformation. Like you can't just deploy an agent unless you've got the data infrastructure, unless you've got the models in place, unless you've got your microservices in place so that they ping the data, you've got your APIs. It's a large technology project that results in an agent being able to be deployed. But the large technology projects take years to do, right? 3-4 years and so on. So in many cases, the challenge is when you're starting a project, how do you know you're going to need an agent? That's the problem right now, is a lot of the projects started before people even understood what the agents were. So adoption ends up being one of these situations where you've got a project, you're already doing it, and now a new solution comes up, and as part of your project, you're trying to integrate new approaches, new solutions, new ways to addressing the problem. So in any ways, adoption is almost a way of reconciling the time frame within which a company deploys technology with the speed at which a particular technology solution showed up for a use case that was anticipated differently when the project was designed, right? So just the word agile actually comes to mind as something kind of useful in that concept.
Yeah, a few things come to mind for me on that too. So one is, what's the messaging coming from the top down in terms of the need for change, right? And so if it's coming from the top and that, this is how we're thinking about our workforce of the future and this is a core part of how we're going to do business, it's an important part of, getting the cultural shifts. Second thing is kind of recognizing that we're getting overwhelmed with the number of AI tools and new chatbots and things that are coming our way from an employee standpoint. And so understanding what the application of that would be, how ready is it to carry on certain tasks is really important, right? So, the public GPTs are more effective than perhaps the internal GPTs that are being developed that have, controls, to your point, as a part of them, or are still being trained on the contextual data that organizations are having to train these models on. And so, being able to communicate the gaps and expectations and what's going to be ready and when is going to be, really important. And then the third piece, like anything, is, how are you incentivizing your people? And part of that is, in communicating how you're going to use, how you expect them to use this data, how we're going to, measure you in terms of, using these tools. And so, I think adoption comes at all those levels, and I think each are going to be really important.
Yep, I think to answer your question is it's hard, right? It's not true. I mean, the only point I wanted to add is the tools which people are giving, the companies are giving tools to everybody, then they want productivity out of that. I think that's not the right way to do it, right? Because you have this AI assistant can listen to all the meetings. Who is reading that? Nobody's reading that, right? So now they're going to ask, what is the productivity from employees because I got 5,000 licenses. Because Diana mentioned that 50% of the cost is going to licenses or AI. These are one of them, right? Like what Jon is talking about is like, now the company told, look, we have built a tool for you, use the tool, and that tool will save you 4 hours of your 40 hours work. That's the way to do it, right? But finding that thing is not easy. Make sense?
Time for one more question, if anyone hasn't. Yeah, perfect.
You had mentioned a new project taking 3 to 4 years when AI agents are maturing in 6 months. So in 3 to 4 years, what you plan today is already going to be outdated. So, I'm thinking fast responding agile, we can call it fragile.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, as we were talking about it right now, so just thinking of a particular large projects and by large project, what I would mean is there's inclusion of large technology migration, large data restructuring, bringing in a bunch of new models, bunch of communication processes with the customers, et cetera. You can see it soup to nuts, right? The specific project comes to mind. We started it, call it 2 years ago. And when the project was designed, the model build started, the design started, the customer interactions were started, all the architectures were approved, right? Everything had to be reviewed. We spent 6-7 months designing, year building models and so on. 2 years later, forget large language models. We're now looking at focused language models and agentic applications. So, yeah, that's a bit of a challenge.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.